One of the most frustrating challenges for beginners is color mixing. The problem is that most people mix randomly, adding one pigment after another without any method. And I've always been jealous of musicians because they have all this theory for their chords. Once you get it, it makes things so easy. I've always wanted to make something similar for color mixing, and today I want to share with you what I call the base tone nuance method, a practical way to mix colors with precision. The idea is pretty simple, but it works, and I made this little cheat sheet so that you can download it to put next to your palette. The image file is on my Patreon because it's part of our community resources, but you don't have to be a member or even have an account. It's public, fully open access. The link is in the description. Back to our point. The BTN method for base, tone, nuance. The base is approximately 60% of your mix. It's the weaker pigment that forms the body of the mixture. The base is usually something more neutral. Think of something like yellow ochre, raw sienna, Naples yellow, or even titanium white, which are classic bases because they have a very low tinting strength, and you can also have all the darkening pigments like the brown, black. Basically everything that can build the thickness of the paint without overwhelming the mix can be considered a base. You can have one or two pigments here to form the base. Then we have the tone. Actually, that's our starting point. We start by choosing this pigment because we use a lot less of it, approximately 30%. Simply speaking, the tone is the paint tube that gets us the closest to the color that we're aiming for. It's the main hue, if you want, the closest match to your target color. It's usually a pigment with more coloring power than the base, more tinting strength. Finally, we add the nuance. It's a strong pigment that makes the final adjustment. It's generally just a touch of a strong pigment to tweak the chroma or adjust the hue. Think of alizarin crimson, for example, to brighten a red, make it more pink, something we use a lot in skin tones. Phthalo blue, for example, to push a green and make it colder, or a cadmium orange to warm up a muted tone. The nuance is kind of the seasoning of the color mixing, and a little goes a long way. This 60-30-10 structure creates balance and prevents overmixing. Technically, these proportions here are just there to give you, an idea. It's more something like a lot of the base, a normal amount of the tone, and just a small amount of the nuance. But I like those numbers like 60-30-10. They make it look more serious. But keep in mind that it's mostly the mental picture here that I need. The fact that, for example, you don't need to drown your entire mix with the tone, and generally a small amount is enough if the pigment has enough tinting strength. So normally you put the pigments with the least tinting strength here. Here's normal tinting strength, and here are the strongest. And the beauty of this method is that it works with any palette, regardless of which pigments you own, as long as you have a good palette selection with evenly distributed paint tubes. Go follow the link to this resource again, because here, as you can see, I've included my color wheel to the resources. So check it out and try to make a selection of vivid paint tubes that cover most of the color wheel. Generally, what you want is a good red, a strong magenta, a deep blue, a clean cyan, a deep green, a light yellow, and maybe a good orange and some earth tones, because they're really useful for skin tones and things from the natural world in general. So now let's assume that you have a good selection of paint tubes, and let's see how this method works. And stay until the end, because I've made a little quiz for you at the end of this section to see if you have a good understanding of how your pigments work with this mixing formula. We'll be studying colors that are based on this painting by John William Waterhouse. It's titled Ulysses and the Sirens, and you know the story. Ulysses is sailing home after the Trojan War and meets the sirens. Their song is so enchanting that it makes sailors crash on the rocks and drown, so he orders his crew to plug their ears with beeswax and tie him to the mast. But let's put the story of this painting on the side and focus on the colors. There is a wide variety of tones in this painting, and we will try to recreate some of them as well as possible and as precisely as possible with our method. So for step one, we need to take care of the hue. The very first thing that we do is look for the right hue, and for that we will be choosing our tone and base. When we mix a color, the most important decision is choosing the right tone. That's our starting point. What tube gets us closest to the color that we're aiming for? So let's try mixing this green here for this example from the hat of Ulysses. Whatever selection of paint tubes you have at your disposal, there is one tube that will be the closest to this green, even if it's still pretty far. And as you see, I have a wide selection of tubes because of all my educational content, so I had to collect them all, but really you don't need that many. In fact, I recommend a list of 15 that you can find in the description box. For this mix though, for this green, I'm going to pick up what I think is the closest thing that I have, and this is this chromium oxide green, PG17. Judging from the label, it will probably be a lot too green and way too dark to match with our target. We're aiming for something that would be approximately here. This would be our target, and chromium oxide green is more somewhere here. So now what we do is we look for a base that would approximately be on this line. This line is of course just something theoretical, but what we try to do here is we're trying to find the pigment for our base, and we try to choose it strategically. The base is usually a weaker pigment and one that can build volume and darken or lighten the mixture without overwhelming it. And if possible, it's a pigment that would be properly aligned like this on our theoretical mixing line. Given the fact that we need to lighten, we can use something like a yellow ochre, like a raw umber. All of these would be fine. If to the contrary we wanted to darken it, then we could consider something black. In this case it would be more brown for so the black is for the cool side of the wheel, the brown is for the warm side of the wheel, or even better, you can use the famous Bob burnt umber and ultramarine blue. It's a perfect pair of complementaries to create a black with warm or cool qualities depending on what you want. So mix burnt umber, ultramarine blue, you can create a black, and it can be a brown or a blue if you want. And it's not the question here, we don't need to darken, but something to keep in mind. In this case, let's keep our chromium oxide green and let's take Naples yellow. And be aware that Naples yellow is a white and a yellow together, so in this paint tube there is already some white. So our base is already two pigments. So in the first step we mix those two pigments and we try to visualize the mixing line on the color wheel. So if one pigment is there and the other one is there, the line theoretically should go there. So at some point when you are mixing, ask yourself, where is my current mix? Where is the color that I'm currently mixing? Does it need to be closer to the green, or does it need to be closer to the Naples yellow? Step 2 is the value. So if we need to darken or lighten, this is where we're allowed to bring some more pigments to the base. We try to preserve the tone as much as possible, but now we want to make the value as close as possible with either something dark or something light to incorporate as part of the base. But the thing is, you want to try to not add more than 2 pigments in your base. The base is the only part of this formula that is allowed to have more than 1 pigment, because the tone is single pigment and the nuance is also single pigment. You want to try to simplify to the absolute max, and every time you incorporate more pigments, consider that you're bringing them to fortify or reinforce the base, either to lighten, to darken, or to bring some more body to the paint, but you are not trying to modify the tone. You will modify the tone only with the nuance. The base is kind of just a big chunk of paint, right? It's a big body of paint, a big paste, and you incorporate the color with the tone, right? And with the nuance. Step 3, we do the nuance. Now we evaluate what our current mix looks like and we try to place it in the color wheel. In our case, it needs to be both darker and warmer, a lot warmer, because it's way too close to our green and it's too light also. So looking at the color wheel right now, you can try to find a pigment that would pull it more in this direction. And in this case, I think that a pyrrole red would work. I'll choose this pyrrole red here. It might seem surprising to use this, but trust me, it will just denature the excessive green and bring it back towards the warm side while darkening. Now, the nuance is something subtle, so you want to go gently and add it progressively. Normally, the nuance will be a very strong pigment, so go easy, and you'll see that a little goes a long way. Now let's check out another example. Let's try to make this pale pink on the top left corner right there. So if I were to ask you, what would you be using as your tone and what would you be using as your base to mix this particular color? Okay, it's pretty simple. Here in this case, the tone would be a red, a bright, vivid red, like let's say cadmium red or pyrrole red, which is the one that I use in this case. And the base would simply be a white, just plain and simple. So the red here in this case is my tone, the white is my base. I use a lot more of my base, like approximately 60%. And as you can see, I incorporate the tone slowly into the base. Works better this way. And it's lacking something. So now let's pause here and tell me, what do you think this color is lacking at this point? I'm gonna give you some time to figure out what kind of nuance I should bring in this case. There you go. So the nuance is a cadmium orange. It just lacks a little touch of orange so that this pink feels less like a sort of a purplish pink and feels more like a reddish pink. So I need to bring it back more towards the red side. And as you can see, I overused the nuance, which happens very often. And now I need to bring more white also because it has darkened the mix. So I'm gonna have to bring some more of my white, incorporate it in the mix again. As you can see, this way I can reach exactly the color with just the right amount of nuance. So it's deceptively simple. You think that just by using red and white you'll get something pink, but is it the right kind of pink? Does it have the right nuance? Well, this is why we use a tone, a base, and a nuance. The three together, they make the perfect combination. And this goes a long way. If you choose properly, and if you always try to make your tone as close as possible to your target, it's very easy. Now, second part of our quiz, if we want to mix this kind of brown, kind of maroon, kind of purplish brown, reddish brown in the corner right there, what pigments do you think we should use? First pigment, what pigment do you think should be the tone in this case? Answer A, tone is a burnt umber, and the base is a quinacridone rose. Option B, the base is the burnt umber, and the quinacridone rose is actually the tone. Or option C, black is our base, and cadmium red is our tone. So here in this case, our tone is actually the quinacridone rose, because this the brown has this base quality. It's a lot more neutral, it's darker, and what is going to really bring this color, give it its punch and its defining quality, is actually the pink. But the base is going to be very, very close to the target because it's this brown, this burnt umber. It's very dark, but as you can see, it's already almost there. So step one, we mix the two and we see how it goes. It doesn't matter if they are not perfectly placed or if they are not perfectly chosen, because we will have the nuance in the end, so we can always change it if necessary. So as you can see, we have this very nice underlying tone. We have this very nice quality that's only brought by the quinacridone rose, create this kind of pinkish quality that you can see in the wings of the sirens in the painting, for example. Now, step 2, we think about the value and it needs to be a lot lighter. So we simply add some white until we get a value that looks approximately like our target. And from there, after you've added the value, you have a much better idea of where the nuance should lead us. So always make sure that you adjust the value before you do the nuance. Don't choose your nuance when you choose the base and the tone. Choose the base and the tone like a couple in the beginning, then adjust the value, and all the way in the end, just pick the nuance and try to pick it very strategically to just make it look exactly how it needs to be. Sometimes you're lucky and you have a perfect match straight out of the tube, but it very rarely happens, and you can't really count on this kind of strategy. So think about placing your base and your tone together, mixing them, adjusting the value, and in the end, add a nuance to make it better and make it look better. So final test. For this one, to mix the blue in the corner, I'm going to use some Prussian blue as my tone because that's what I have, right? It's PB27, and I'm going to use some white as my base because Prussian blue is obviously going to be a lot darker than what I'm trying to go for here in this corner. Now, the question is, once I mix it, and I want to take you to the point where it's mixed, I'm going to ask you, what kind of nuance should I bring to make this look more like the target color? All right, so there we are, mixing. And now, what do you think? What should I add to make this look better? So I'm adding a little madder lake. It's a very pink, very bright pinkish organic red, and it's going to pull this mix more towards the purple side, because right now it has too much of a green quality. I need to kill this green and pull this mix slightly more towards the purplish side. Another thing that's crazy, if you observe the painting of the sea here in this example by Waterhouse, is that this notion of mixing base, tone, and nuance 60%, 30%, 10% also works if you're not actually blending all the paint together, but if you're juxtaposing paint, it also works. So you can create the same effect without mixing on the palette, simply by letting pure brush strokes juxtaposed and placed next to each other to create this optical mixing. It also works. That's great. That's whatever works in mixing works also in juxtaposing, in optical mixing, and this is crazy. And now you have a proper method that will also help you achieve this effect very easily without, guessing, by just being methodical and organized and being accurate and super sharp with your colors. So next time you're at your easel, don't fall into the trap of randomly mixing paint. Think strategically. Base, tone, nuance. Follow the steps on your cheat sheet and you'll never be at the mercy of your palette again. Take this into your own work and practice with 3 pigments at a time, 4 if you count the darkening or the lightening pigment, and soon enough you won't need this method again, but you'll have a much better understanding of mixing. If you want to watch another great color mixing video, check out this one next. And as always, my friends, joy and inspiration to you.